You are listening to The Soul's Quiet Call, written by Akumah and voiceover by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 8, A Mirror of Shadows. The morning mist hung low over the town, curling around the streets and hugging the coastline like a whispered secret. Meera stood in front of her flower shop, watching the world outside blur into a soft haze. She had always loved this hour, the quiet stillness before the town came alive. The flowers in her shop were like her thoughts, arranged in delicate patterns, but often hiding deeper meanings beneath their simple beauty. The shop had been busier than usual in the past week, filled with customers who came for more than just flowers. They came for the sense of peace they found within the walls of her little sanctuary, for the soft fragrance that seemed to ease their troubles, if only for a while. But for Meera, peace had become elusive. Every time Aarav came to visit, she couldn't help but notice the shift in him. There were moments when the smile on his face didn't quite reach his eyes, when the warmth in his voice flickered like a dying flame. She had known Aarav long enough now to sense the things he wasn't saying, the things he kept buried deep inside. But despite the closeness they were beginning to share, he still kept so much hidden from her. The quiet grief that lingered just beneath the surface was becoming more difficult to ignore. And it troubled her more than she cared to admit. She turned back to the flowers, her hands moving instinctively, carefully selecting each stem as if they held the answers she was searching for. Today, she wanted to create something that spoke of healing, of strength, of resilience. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was because she saw those qualities in him, even if he refused to acknowledge them. Or perhaps it was because she saw them in herself, too. She chose white lilies for purity, delicate ferns for endurance, and soft violets for faithfulness. As she arranged them into a bouquet, she thought of how each flower represented something she knew about Aarav, something he didn't yet see in himself. As she worked, the door of the shop opened with its familiar chime. Meera didn't need to look up to know who it was. She could feel the subtle change in the air, the shift in the room that only Aarav's presence could bring. "Good morning," Aarav said, his voice soft, but with a hint of weariness. "Morning," she replied, not meeting his eyes immediately. She finished tying the bouquet with a ribbon, then turned to face him, a calm smile on her lips. "What brings you in today?" He shrugged, his gaze drifting to the flowers. "I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by." His eyes flickered to the bouquet in her hands, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something soft and vulnerable, beneath the cool mask he wore. Meera held out the bouquet for him, her voice gentle. "I made this for you. It's for resilience, healing." Aarav's brows furrowed slightly as he reached for it, his fingers brushing against hers in a fleeting touch. His gaze lingered on the flowers for a long moment, and Meera could see the effect it had on him. She had hoped it would be the right choice, that the quiet beauty of the bouquet would speak to something deep within him, something he hadn't yet been able to put into words. "Resilience," he echoed softly, turning the bouquet in his hands, studying it as if it held the answers he couldn't find within himself. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." Meera felt a tightening in her chest. She had always been able to read people, could always see the hidden desires and pains in their eyes, but Aarav was different. For the first time, she felt as though she had placed something in his hands that he didn't fully understand. "Does it remind you of anything?" she asked, her voice casual, though she was watching him closely. Aarav took a slow breath, his eyes momentarily closing as though he were collecting his thoughts. He looked up at her, a flicker of something almost like surprise crossing his features. "It reminds me of a time when I was younger," he said, his voice low. He looked away, his gaze drifting out the window to the swirling mist outside. "I never really understood what it meant to be strong. Not until I had to learn the hard way." Meera's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was the sudden openness in his voice or the rawness of his words, but something deep inside her stirred. She stepped closer to him, her voice quieter now. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. Aarav's eyes flickered to hers, a fleeting moment of vulnerability before he turned away again. No, I think I need to. It's just, he trailed off, his gaze distant, as if searching for the right words. Meera waited in silence, allowing him the space to speak. She had never pushed him, never tried to force him to share what he wasn't ready to. But this was different. There was something about the bouquet, the way it seemed to mirror the brokenness in his eyes, that made her feel as though she could reach him. My parents, they never understood me, Aarav began, his voice thick with an emotion he clearly wasn't used to showing. When I was younger, I wanted to be a writer. But he paused, swallowing hard, his fingers tightening around the stems of the bouquet. They wanted me to follow their path, to take over the family business. They didn't see me, Meera. They never saw who I really was. Meera felt the weight of his words settle between them. It wasn't just his family he was talking about, it was himself. He had spent so much of his life hiding from the person he truly was, from the truth he had been too afraid to face. I tried, for years, he continued, his voice growing softer, almost to the point of breaking. But I was never good enough for them. I wasn't who they wanted me to be. So, I left. I ran away and never looked back. Meera's heart broke for him, but she didn't interrupt. She simply stood there, her breath held, waiting for him to continue. I thought I'd found peace, but Aarav's voice faltered. It's like I've been carrying that disappointment with me everywhere I go. Like it's a shadow that never leaves me. Meera felt a pang of something deep and painful in her chest. She knew what it was like to feel unseen, to feel like the world only saw what they wanted to see, not the real you. You are more than that, Aarav, she said softly, stepping closer to him, her hand brushing against his arm in an unspoken gesture of comfort. You don't have to carry that burden anymore. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time. His eyes softened, and the rawness of his emotions was laid bare before her. I don't know how to let go, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Meera's heart fluttered in her chest as she reached out to him, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. You don't have to let go all at once. Just take it one step at a time. And I'll be here, Aarav. You don't have to carry it alone. Aarav exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. He looked down at the bouquet in his hands once more, and for the first time, Meera saw a spark of something in his eyes, something that resembled hope. I don't know what to do with all of this, he said quietly, lifting his gaze to meet hers. But I think I might finally be ready to try. Meera's heart raced in her chest, a mixture of hope and uncertainty filling her. They were both standing at the edge of something they couldn't quite define but both knew was important. Aarav's shoulders seemed to relax for the first time in days. Thank you, he whispered, his voice rough but sincere. Meera smiled gently. You don't have to thank me. Just know that you're not alone. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared silence, one that spoke volumes about what had been said, and what had been left unsaid. As Aarav left the shop that day, the door closing softly behind him, Meera stood still, her heart full. She hadn't fixed anything, hadn't solved his problems. But for the first time, she felt like she was truly seeing him, truly understanding the depth of his pain, his hopes, and the part of him he had kept hidden for so long. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something new.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Refer to the channel playlist for a better experience and close your eyes to let your imagination run wild. Subscribe.